caucus meetings are supposed to be confidential, and we were constantly admonished that things that were said and done in caucus meetings was to be kept private. And that's another area where things were not handled very, very well. So it went from yelling and swearing to then violating caucus confidentiality. And, I haven't spoken about what happened in there because I thought we were bound by that. But obviously that confidentiality agreement has been waived by the party leader, and that's where it's at.
Dallas Brodie. That's the name of the now independent MLA for BC's Vancouver-Coachella riding, who you probably know because of her very publicized exit from the BC Conservatives. Just over a month ago, she was serving as their critic to Attorney General until she made the factual claim that to date there have been 0 bodies discovered at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, contrary to widespread mis- and disinformation that is still growing strong in many institutions, including our very own Law Society of BC. That's what she spoke to. You can find out all the back details to that story at our special website called kamloopsdocumentary.com. But today I bring you an important update in collaboration with my colleague Alexa Laveau, the Bureau Chief Reporter for Quebec, who, unlike myself, who couldn't get any response from Mr. Rustad, digging to what really happened. Why did he really kick Brody out of caucus? And why did he use a 4-second video that was out of context to make it look like she mocked sexual abuse advisors? Well, instead of those unanswered questions for my email inquiries, Alexa caught up with him in person at a Canada Strong and Free event. We're going to hear the answer to a few of the questions I gave her to ask him. And then we're going to hear from Miss Brody herself in response.
This whole thing about my truth and your truth, my truth.
I, of course, wanted to know, as many did who saw our reports on your exit, why did he play that 4-second clip and let the world know that he claimed that you were mocking sexual abuse survivors? And to that, he said the following.
So the issue was, and so when she first came out and talked about the truth, I supported that being out there. That was no problem. I think I would have liked to use some different wording, which is what I tried to encourage her to do. Then she did a video where she was referring to Alia Warbus, who was a member in our caucus, and her grandmother, quite frankly, who was a residential school survivor. And she used a mocking tone and kind of mocked what she was saying and how all of that came forward. And I felt that was wrong. That's inappropriate to do that. And so that's why there was an issue there. It was never anything to do with the facts that came forward, because I agree those are the facts and we do need to make sure that the truth is dealt with.
I don't know Alia very well. I don't know her grandmother. I've never heard her speak of her grandmother before in front of me. It's just, there was nothing about Ms. Warbus that was on my mind when I was on that video talking on that call. I was mocking woke cultural expressionism, which basically says that all truths are valid, and making the point that objective truth is what we need to predicate things on in our society, and that this notion that there are several different truths and they're all equally valid is simply just not true. I do know that if we don't have truth, not his truth, her truth, my grandmother's truth, or, this whole thing about my truth and your truth, my truth. This stuff has to stop. It's like, it's got to be the truth. And that was the point I was making. It had absolutely nothing to do with anyone in my caucus, and it was not even on my mind. And I remember at that meeting when Ms. Warbus brought it up and started, frankly, yelling at me. I didn't even know what she was talking about.
So in that video, we'll play real quickly here, you do mention her, but it is not in the same time where you're talking about what you just said. We'll play that here.
I've had people, I guess there's a person in our party who's Indigenous, and she, was super angry and went to town and joined the NDP to call me out.
And of course, you didn't mention her by name there. We've already shown a little bit of the outrage she had following your meeting, and I might as well show that as well.
We need to address the division within the caucus and get on the same page as a team. And if we cannot do that, then I do not know why I came here and sacrificed my time to be a political representative.
Emotions boiling over amongst BC Conservatives Thursday. House Leader A'alia Warbus visibly emotional in her anger at colleague Dallas Brodie.
Her issue is about a word in a Law Society's education programming. And that's what she wants to go marching out to stand for. Is abhorrent to me.
Now, something that stood out to me that I hadn't actually heard before was this claim. We saw in the statement the claim that you said to your colleagues, allegedly you said, hey, if you want me out, vote me out kind of thing. Mr. Rustad is claiming you did that not once, but twice, and that you chose to leave the party.
When I went into that meeting, first of all, things got ugly very quickly. And before you know it, one by one, people were yelling, swearing, being extremely rude, yelling at me and then at one of the other MLAs. And it was very unpleasant. At one point, I stood up to explain what I had been dealing with at the Law Society, the specifics of what I had been dealing with, because it dawned on me that a lot of people in my party didn't even know the issue that had arisen at the Law Society regarding the mandatory Indigenous cultural training course that they have there. So I tried to explain that, but that didn't help anything. And so I sat back down, and at one point it got so unpleasant that I said, look, I can leave the room and you can vote if you'd like to remove me from caucus. I don't recall saying that twice. I said it once. They didn't remove me. I sat there and listened for a while longer. The people yelling and swearing continued on. And I have a policy that I don't participate in being yelled at. And I quietly just, while they were yelling at someone else, actually, I picked up my bag and quietly walked out the door. But there was no storming. And this is incredible to me.
Just so we're clear, how did you find out you were not allowed in the party? Did they say, hey, you quit? Or, what does that look like behind the scenes?
There was a press release made. I found out the announcement was made. Yeah.
Okay. And last question, perhaps not that surprising. We didn't actually get the question or the answer to the question about what his opinion was about your calls to defund that council for wanting truthful speech about residential schools to be criminalized. We never got an answer on that.
Yeah, look, there's a reality in Canada. Obviously, there's just an absolute tragedy that happened with residential schools, with kids that died, kids that never went home, kids that were taken from families. And I think it's important to recognize the truth about what happened there. Then we've got the situation in British Columbia where there is the potential for grave sites. And so there was a big uproar over that. There's funding that went towards it, but they haven't found anybody buried there. And I think we need to get to the bottom of that truth in terms of what's going on there, because obviously it had such a big impact. But we need to do that from a respectful perspective of the damage that was done associated with residential schools. And so from my perspective, we need to understand what the truths are on all sides in terms of this. And I was the minister responsible for years. I went to Truth and Reconciliation Commission hearings. I heard from residential school survivors, people that went through the trauma, the issues. I've been out on sites. I've seen this firsthand. And so we need to make sure, though, that the truth is known.
But he did give an answer about perhaps the sort of hypocritical look between how you were treated versus him coming out and saying, hey, I stand by basically Aaron Gunn, the Vancouver Island candidate, who's under fire in the same bogus type way.
Yeah, so obviously those two issues are very different, and the truth about what happened with Miss Brodie. Obviously, there was the mocking those issues, but Miss Brodie on 2 occasions actually demanded to be kicked out of caucus. She was looking to leave caucus, and during a caucus meeting where caucus members wanted to bring this up, she stood up. She started yelling in caucus and making accusations of caucus, and then demanding to be kicked out of caucus and stormed out. And so we actually didn't kick her out of caucus. She left voluntarily. All I said is that she wouldn't be invited back in.
So yeah, it was a pretty stark difference in treatment. And I don't know what to say about that. I don't know how he can live with those two things, but he's trying to chalk it up to, I was rude to another colleague or mocked someone, which is not true. And there was plenty of room to resolve that if that's what they thought had happened. But that's I don't know what to say about the difference in the treatment between Aaron Gunn and me. It's a very obvious difference in treatment. And another thing, Drea, is that caucus meetings are supposed to be confidential. And we were constantly admonished that things that were said and done in caucus meetings was to be kept private. And that's another area where things were not handled very, very well. So it went from yelling and swearing to then violating caucus confidentiality. And, I haven't spoken about what happened in there because I thought we were bound by that. But obviously that confidentiality agreement has been waived by the party leader, and that's where it's at. And I think that's too bad.
It wasn't lost on me to notice that we only heard about you walking out, not what perhaps led to that. But thanks for shedding some light on that and being back on Rebel News. To find out more stories of Canadians, politicians, teachers, and more being cancelled over claims of so-called residential school denialism, check out our website called kamloopsdocumentary.com. And if you value this very important reporting that the mainstream and, to be honest, many independent media is scared to touch, please consider donating while you're there to help cover my investigations into continuing to dig for the truth when many bands refuse to do so.